All right. So let's go ahead and go over this together. I am going to take some, I'm going to do random volunteers. And we're going to go to Richard first. So Richard, for this models code snippet here, can you identify one of our what I would call MVC infractions? Do we have her, Richard? I don't see Richard. Okay, let's go to Kevin.
Yeah, in the model, it shouldn't, the def self.average age should not be interpolating the years afterwards, and the round should be in the should be in the, well, that should be in the views, and but the round should be also not in the model because it's not letting it pass raw data. So the round should be in the view, would be my guess, or the controller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got it. The displaying this like string text and rounding this number very nicely, that should go in the view, because our view is our presentation logic. And what you said is exactly right, Kevin. We want our models to return just raw data. So they just give us the data back and that's it. If you think back to our independent challenge yesterday, what Jameson and I did was we did a 2i in the model, and that is a little bit more of data logic, converting something to an integer. That's taking data from one data type, converting it to another. So that's okay, even though 2i like kind of rounds something. But if you're just rounding, you're really doing that for presentation purposes. So yes, that should be in the views. Great job, Kevin. And if anybody has any questions as we go ahead and put your hand up. I think that's about it for the views. This average special runtime method seems just fine. You could make the argument that if we really dig deep, we could say like specials.average. Well, because we're calling an average on the specials, we could consider making a class method in the specials class, but that would still be model logic. So we'd really be talking about moving logic from a model to a model. Let's go into the views here and let's hear from Aaliyah.
So in my group, we had a lot of discussion about this and some questions, more than answers, but Mark pointed out that this like .specials.count piece here in the view should be in the controller instead, I think is where he said. But one of the questions that, like, part of the reason I was not sure how to do that is like, because we're iterating through comedians, how would we, I wasn't sure how we would actually be able to do like .specials.count on an individual comic without actually doing the iteration in the view.
Yes, so I think the way I might say that is this iteration is fine to do in the view. It's really like this part that we are not sure about. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, we don't want to do, could you say it one more time, Aaliyah? So we don't want this piece of, well, specifically comics.specials.count is what you said. We don't want that in the view. And we want to move it somewhere else. You said the controller, and I would say the controller is probably not the best place for this. Can I get someone to explain to me why I might put it somewhere else? Yeah, Zach.
So it's going to be a two-parter. One, I believe you'd most likely want to put this in the model and make it a instance method so that you can just call specials count on each instance of comic.
And why? What type of data? What type of logic is this?
It's model logic because you're accessing the relationship between comic and specials. So you want that to live in the model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other way I might say that is like, this is data logic. I even slipped up and said it. Like, this is very much dealing with, as you said, like associated records. That's very much like database data storage. Yeah.
And so my second part though is, I guess maybe it's like a design choice, but making a method out of this seems like you would make a method called specials_count, which I guess is that line between like, is it actually useful to throw it in the model when it's still readable right here?
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. The method would essentially be specials_count, and it would do .specials.count. And so it would feel like, what really are we saving here? I would say this is an example of like being as strict with MVC as possible. So you'll see in our, let me actually go to our the rubric that I showed you all yesterday for our assessments. And you'll see for a 4, we say student strictly adheres to MVC principles. So I would say this example is kind of like that very, very most strict level as possible. We're saying like absolutely no data logic in the views, not even a dot count. Like a dot count is data logic, and we would want to refactor that out. So I agree, Zach. It probably wouldn't be a huge benefit to make a model method out of this, but if we're trying to be as strict as possible, that is the way you would do it. I think there would be and you said like this is a stylistic question, I agree. This to me would totally depend on the team that I'm on. I would probably like have this conversation with my team members and kind of see what we think, come to a conclusion. And I probably wouldn't care too much either way. I just would want to know like, hey, what can we just agree on what we're going to do here? Agree on something and move on.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? And this might be obvious, but is maybe just clicking for me now. So what you're saying is that we can access, like we would create an instance method on comic within the model that does specials.count, and we can access model methods from within the view directly. It doesn't have to go through the controller. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes, it is totally fine to call instance methods from the view.
But
So
not
yes,
class methods, right?
but not class methods, yeah. I want to go back over to intro to MVC here. And just kind of point out where that is. So if a view has access to instance variables or a collection of instances in an array that's iterating over, it's appropriate for the view to call instance methods from the model class if needed. A view should not call class methods, except in extremely rare cases where data builder requires it, such as a drop-down select in a form, for example. So that's kind of where that is. Now, when we say like we should not call class methods, I interpret, and this is again, like this is kind of like a stylistic choice. I've had conversations with other instructors and it can go either way. The way that I like really interpret this is I don't want to see the name of the class in the view. So for example, let's actually go to, let's go to setlist. Actually, I do want to go back to that IC because I think there's a good example in that IC. Yeah. So yesterday, Jameson and I were making a model method to show the average mechanic experience. Sorry, let me redo my Zoom window. Okay. So in our mechanic model, we made this class method to show their average experience. And then in the mechanic index, we called this method right here. So we said at mechanics.average mechanic experience. Now at mechanics is a collection of mechanics. So in active record, when you call a method on a collection of a model, it is calling a class method. So that's how that works. So add mechanics is a collection. When we can call a class method on it, so it will run this method over here. So this is okay to do, in my opinion. What I don't want to see is this mechanic. I don't want to see a model referenced in the view. And as that lesson plan says, except in extremely rare cases where like drop downs kind of need that to happen, but we want to avoid this as much as possible. And the way I would kind of draw this is in terms of MVC, like this is the way that we draw it. We really want the controller to be the go-between between the model in the view. As soon as you reference this model in the view, you're creating, I don't know what, you're creating this relationship, which is not great. Now you're kind of like passing things 3 different ways, which is what we want to avoid. So that's the rationale behind that. Mark?
Just to kind of like get clarity, the app mechanics is already set to capital M mechanic. So they're essentially the same thing, but you're just kind of like giving it an alias in the view.
Yeah, exactly. Let me find the mechanics controller, because yeah, we want to see what that is. So maybe I could do this. So now we can see all pieces of MVC here. We can see model view and controller. Yeah, I can, let me just clear my drawing here. So yes, from the controller, we set at mechanics equal to mechanic.all. So this is functionally equivalent to mechanic.all.average mechanic experience, but stylistically, we don't want to make that connection in the view. We don't want to make the connection to the model in the view.
Okay, thanks. One more question is, I remember like Kevin mentioned that you kind of like from the model, you have the 2i again. Can you remind me, like, are we supposed to pass out the raw data so that 2i should be somewhere else, or does it matter?
This is okay, because I would say this is still like data manipulation. Like we're still converting from a float to an integer would still be considered data manipulation. But if we did, we would not want this to be round to like this. If we really wanted to round something, that is changing how we're displaying it. So if we were rounding, I would probably throw that right here. Or maybe I want to round it to like the nearest whole number. So I'll just say dot round.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Joe.
So is the purpose of good MVC practices like organization, or is it actual functionality, or is it security, or a little bit of all of it?
I would say it's a little bit of all of it. I would say the most important thing is organization. Yeah, really what this comes down to is this is a practice of SRP. Did you all discuss SRP in Mod 1? A little bit, maybe?
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not. So SRP is the single responsibility principle. And it's a very, I would say it kind of goes right along with dry. Did you all talk about dry in Mod 1? Yeah. A little bit more. So, okay, so for dry and SRP, those are like kind of two, I would say, fundamental principles in computer science. So dry is do not repeat yourself. We don't want to write code multiple times. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I would say the biggest one is maintainability. If you have code written in multiple places, if it needs to change, then you have to go and change it in all of those places. So we only want to define code once and just reuse it everywhere. That's why we have methods. We have methods so that we can reuse this logic. We don't want to just rewrite this logic every time we need it. So that's a great example of dry. So dry, very, very fundamental principle. SRP is another one, single responsibility principle. I only want my classes and methods to do one thing. And the reason for that is reusability. Again, if it's doing one thing, I can move that one thing around and use it independently, versus if it's doing 4 things at once, it's a more specific use case. It's okay, I can only use this method when it's doing those 4 things. Same thing with classes. If classes are doing too much at once, it's kind of hard for them to be reused. Think back to Black Thursday. Did you all do Black Thursday? I think that was your group project. Yeah. So think back to Black Thursday. We wanted, you were probably encouraged to make a different class for each one of those CSV files that you had. You wouldn't want to make like one big class of like CSV data, because then it would deal with too many things at once. So SRP is this idea that we really only want everything to do one thing. MVC is an application of that idea. When we're talking about model, view, and controller, we want each of those components to do one thing. The model, we only want to deal with data logic. The view, we only want to deal with presentation logic.
Okay. Also, your battery is dangerously low.
My battery is low? 18, I'm living on the edge. It's all right, we'll roll with it. Kevin.
Yeah, I kind of had a kind of nitpicky question about that def average mechanics experience. When you add .2i, it does manipulate the data, but doesn't also serve to chop off all the decimals. So if you wanted the decimals for another view, then wouldn't it be bad that you chopped off all the decimals points in the model here?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you said like you're being nitpicky. This whole class is like, let's be nitpicky about MVC. So great, thank you for asking. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Kevin. This method is not very flexible now, because if we did want the decimal value, well, we just kind of like chopped it off. The technical term that you'll hear is truncate. We are truncating a decimal. You're kind of just cutting off the decimal there. Yeah, that's a great point. For this IC, I would say I don't care too much about it. But yeah, if this was a larger application, I would probably consider that. And if there's any use case where I would need the decimal, then I would not put 2i in this method. And I would probably let that happen somewhere else.
So if you wanted to truncate it to 0 decimals, instead of doing .2i in the model, you could do just .round 0 then in the view. If you wanted to keep the raw data as a float, would that be the best alternative?
So .2i and .round will behave differently. .2i will truncate, whereas .round will round to the nearest decimal.
Oh, that's
so
right.
Like 5.5 would round up to 6 versus 2i would 5.5 would go down to 5. What I might do in that case is might make just another method, self dot average experience whole or something like this, and then I would just call average mechanic. Oops, sorry. Average mechanic experience .2i here. So if I really needed 2 different versions, I could probably just make the 2 different versions of those methods. But if I wanted to round it, I would probably put that in the view. And this is a good conversation. We're kind of entering into the territory of, I don't have a strong preference one way or another. I just want you to think about your style and where you're putting your logic. I think Lee had a hand up. Lee, did we get to your question?
Yeah, I don't really know if my question fully makes sense, especially for this class. So I think I can ask it at another time. I'll throw it into code help, but thank you.
Sure. Let's go to Caleb for this last chunk of code. So there's 2 controllers here. Let's just stick with this first one. Caleb, could you talk about what MVC violation might we see in that chunk of code?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. So in this controller, you're calling, you're kind of doing manipulation. Your dot average age is kind of doing a calculation in a controller when that should have been thrown in the model. In addition, I believe we discussed that or no, it's the next one that already exists. So yeah, that is the issue I draw with this one.
Perfect. Yep, that we've got, and you said manipulation. I would just throw in one thing there. I would say it's data manipulation. It's specifically like this is the data. If we were like dealing with the params object, even like down here, we can see that in the second example. We're still manipulating something, but it's not like database data. This is params. Great job, Caleb. Let's go to Emmy for this last one.
What was the question again? Sorry.
So for this last chunk of code here, what is the MVC violation?
Okay. So I'd say the first thing would be that second instance variable, the way that they call on at comedian.average special runtime. I feel like sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, it's something in this line of code that we don't like.
I want to say it's the amount of actions you call on it, but I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, it's there are like too many things being called here in the view. Do you want to bump to a classmate?
Yes, please.
Let's do it. Let's go to Gunnar. You're volunteering.
Yeah, that dot round 2 or the round that should probably go in the views because you're that's more of like a visual representation.
Yep, you've got it. That is the visualization or the presentation logic in the controller. Great job. So just to kind of go through this one more time, models responsible for data logic, views responsible for presentation logic, and controllers in the lesson plan and intro to MVC, you'll see it described as like business logic, application logic. I almost just say it's everything else. Like if it's not presentation logic, if it's not data logic, it's probably controller logic. So comedian here, in this model, we've got presentation logic. In this view here, we've got data logic. In this controller, we've got data logic. And in this controller, we've got presentation logic. So those are the mismatches between our logic responsibilities. I would say that based on our conversation, we spent a lot of time talking about this one, and this one probably is the most tricky one to kind of to key in on. Susie.
Yeah, quick question about the last example for controllers. Would it be violating MVC convention if you had this whole line, the add comedian dot average special runtime in view? Because I'm thinking because it's it looks like it's an instance method being called on comedian.
Yes, that would be totally fine. So yeah,
Okay.
If this whole line was just in the view, that would be great. There would be no issue with that. We said earlier, it's fine to call instance methods in the view, and then the round would also be in the view. So those are two things that would be fine to have in the view.
Okay.
James.
I just wanted some more clarification on why round would be like a presentation formatting decision as opposed to a model. And the reason why I want clarification is because in TDD, you would have to be expected to like match a number to like, I don't know, like 8 decimal places if it was exact. And that just seems like a lot of headache for a model test.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So I think there's two things there. So the first is like, why would round be considered? Why would it be considered presentation logic if rounding is kind of like a mathematical operation? And I think that's a good point. I don't know. This is one that I would say is like, this is very conventional, is that like rounding is always like something that would be done in the views. I would say even beyond that, this kind of hits at the idea that the model should really just return the raw data. As Kevin pointed out earlier, if I go back to this example, if we call .2i on this method up here, whoops, if I just do it like this, If we call .2i up here, we're really like limiting what this method can do. It's really just only returning an integer, versus if we let it just return the raw data, we can manipulate it. Oops. We can manipulate it further like we're doing it down here in this second method call. So I'd say it's always just better to have your method return raw data and then let someone else manipulate, or some other class manipulate it. The second part is about testing. And so, yeah, let's do a little refactoring here. Mechanic spec. And let me go to my tests. So I have refactored my method. It's no longer calling .2i. So if I run my mechanic spec, I will see now I'm getting a failure. DES invalid. Where is that happening? Direction DE. Did I take off the for some reason I took off DESC. Okay, there we go. So now I'm down to my one failure here. So my failure here, this is kind of to your point, Jameson, we are like now getting back a decimal. And maybe if I even do this, let's see, this would average out to 5.5. If I just added in another mechanic, and I think that should make a repeating decimal, kind of like you're saying. There we go. Okay. So then if our model is now just returning this raw data, well, how do we test this? So I could like just take this number here and put it as my expectation right here. Like I could try to do that. I don't even know if that would work. Yeah. Yeah, and see, you could even see it's like expecting this. I mean, I could then change this to like 4.333333, and it's still like not quite working. It's like off by this repeating decimal. So yes, this is like very hard to test. So typically the way that I will test this is I will just round both of them, or I will just say here, round this, because I probably only care about 2 decimals. So I'll call the round, but notice that I'm calling it in the test, not in the model method. So then I can say I would expect this if we're rounding it to be 4.33. So that's how I would do that.
Excellent, thank you.
Other questions? All right. I'm going to put you back in your breakout rooms for the rest of the class. So we've got about 14 minutes. I'd like for you all to share some code from your project. So try to find a point in your code. We don't have time to probably do this full code review of like set a timer and all of this. What I would say is just try to find a place in your project where you have a question about MVC, or maybe you think you had an MVC violation, and try to create some discussion around that. So really co-chair your project with that lens of MVC principles. And that will take us to the end of class. So I'll set a timer for 13 minutes and then I will close the rooms right after that.
Hey, Brian. Just wanted to follow up on the message I sent previously about the project check-ins. Yeah, if it was okay if I forego the project because I don't have anything to really show or to share or to compare. So I feel like it would be better spent. I've been on like this kind of just purge run